High. Snow lay unbroken except where fences cut dark lines across the fields, and the wind carried no mercy for those left standing alone. On the far edge of a struggling ranch, a young woman sat bound to a rough wooden post, her breath coming out in thin clouds as daylight slipped toward evening. She did not cry out. The frontier had already taught her that cries often fell into empty space and never came back. Her name was Layla, and she had learned early that frontier life did not care about soft hearts or gentle hopes. The man she married had promised shelter and belonging, but sickness took him before the first winter passed. What remained was his family's land, their hard faces, and a house where kindness had no place. They spoke of her as a burden, a mouth that ate more than it earned. When the work grew thin and the cold grew sharp, their patience broke like old ice. They tied her there that morning, hands numb, eyes fixed away from her face. It was not done in rage, but in cold decision, as if she were a stray animal left for the weather to finish. When they walked back toward the house, the sound of their boots faded, leaving only wind and the creak of frozen wood. Hours passed. The sun climbed and fell, weak and distant. Layla shifted when she could, easing her wrists against the rope, though she knew it would not give. Her dress was thin, patched many times, and snow crept into its folds. She thought of her husband's quiet smile, of nights when the fire burned low and hope still felt possible. She thought of the stories she once heard about Wild West love stories, where kindness rode in from nowhere and carried the broken away. Those stories felt far now, like dreams remembered from another life. Beyond the fence line, the land stretched wide and empty. Forgotten trails cut through the snow, paths once taken by wagons, traders, and native families moving with the seasons. Layla had met an old woman once who spoke of listening to the land, of knowing when help was near. Layla closed her eyes and listened, but all she heard was wind. The sound of hooves came so faintly she thought it might be her heart playing tricks on her. Then it came again, slow and steady, carrying weight and purpose. She lifted her head, hair loose around her face, and looked toward the rise beyond the field. A lone rider appeared against the fading light, his horse dark against the snow. He sat easy in the saddle, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent his life between sky and earth. His coat was worn but cared for, his hat pulled low, shadowing eyes that watched the land instead of fighting it. Elias had not planned to ride this way. He followed old habits, trails others had forgotten, checking fence lines for a neighbor who had not been seen since autumn. The plains had taught him that survival often depended on noticing what others missed. When he saw the shape near the fence, something in him tightened. He slowed his horse, eyes narrowing as the form took shape. A woman, bound. Still. Elias dismounted without haste, though his pulse had already changed its rhythm. He approached slowly so as not to frighten her, boots crunching softly in the snow. When Layla heard him near, she opened her eyes again, fear flickering there before settling into tired caution. He stopped a few steps away, taking in the rope, the red marks on her wrists, the way cold had hollowed her cheeks. He did not ask questions at first. The frontier taught him that words came after action. "I'm going to cut you loose," he said, his voice low and steady. Tears welled in Lila's eyes, but she blinked them back. Hope was dangerous. Still, she nodded. The knife moved quick and sure. The rope fell away, stiff with frost. Elias shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders before she could speak. The warmth startled her more than the freedom. "Can you stand?" he asked. She tried. Her legs shook, but with his arm firm around her, she managed. The fence creaked behind them like a witness that would never speak. Before either could say more, voices carried across the snow. Her in-laws had seen them from the house and were coming fast, anger driving their steps. Their words cut through the air, sharp and accusing. Elias turned to face them, placing himself between Leela and the approaching figures. He stood calm, hand resting near his side, not reaching for trouble, but ready if it came. "She comes with me," he said, his voice carrying across the open land. The words hung there, heavy with meaning. Layla clutched the coat tighter, unsure whether to breathe or cry. The wind shifted and the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the frozen ground. No one moved. The old west town lay miles away, and between here and there stretched a land that decided its own rules. Elias did not know what the next moment would bring. He only knew that turning back was no longer an option. The words did not fade when Elias spoke them. They settled into the cold air and seemed to harden there, as solid as the ground beneath their boots. The men stopped a short distance away, their faces tight with surprise and anger. Layla felt Elias shift his stance slightly, not in challenge but in quiet certainty, like a man who had already weighed the cost and accepted it. She's family, one of them said at last, though the claim rang thin. You got no right. Elias did not raise his voice. Out here, he said, a body freezing to death ain't family. It's neglect. Silence followed. The land itself seemed to listen. The men glanced at one another, calculating, then spat into the snow and turned back toward the house. They did not threaten him, not yet. They had learned enough about the plains to know when a moment was not theirs to win. When they were gone, Layla's knees finally gave. Elias caught her before she fell, steady hands holding her upright. He did not pull her close, only kept her from collapsing into the snow. Easy, he said. Cold steel strength. He guided her to his horse and helped her sit on a fallen rail while he fetched a canteen. She drank slowly, the water sharp and alive against her tongue. Warmth crept back in small, painful waves. They did not speak much as he lifted her onto the saddle and mounted behind her. The horse moved off at an even pace, careful of its footing. The ranch fell behind them, shrinking into the pale distance. Lila did not look back. As they rode, the world opened wide again. Low hills rolled out like sleeping animals, fences broken here and there where storms had won. Elias followed a trail that barely showed, one he had ridden many times when he needed space from towns and questions. Layla leaned forward slightly, more from exhaustion than trust. She felt the steady rise and fall of the horse, the quiet strength of the man behind her. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to rely on anyone that the feeling frightened her. They reached his cabin as dusk settled in. Smoke curled thin from the chimney, a sign of life against the wide emptiness. Elias helped her down and guided her inside, where the air smelled of wood and coffee grounds. The place was simple. One table, two chairs, a narrow bed, shelves lined with tools, and a few worn books. You can rest, he said, setting another log on the fire. I'll make something warm. Lila sat, hands wrapped around herself. The firelight softened the sharp edges of the room. She watched him move, each motion practiced, unhurried. This was a man shaped by frontier life, by long days and quiet nights. She wondered what he had lost to stand so calm in a world that took so much. When he handed her a tin cup, their fingers brushed. She flinched before she could stop herself. I won't hurt you, he said gently, not offended. But you don't have to trust that yet. The words eased something in her chest. She nodded and took a sip. The broth warmed her throat and settled in her stomach like a promise she was afraid to accept. Later, wrapped in a blanket near the fire, Layla spoke in halting pieces. She told him of her childhood on a small homestead that failed when the soil turned stubborn, of traveling west with hope tied to every mile, of a marriage built on need more than love, and a husband who tried but could not outrun sickness. She spoke of the house where she was never welcome, of children she sometimes watched from a distance, wishing she could protect them from the same cold lessons. Elias listened without interruption. When she finished, he stared into the fire for a long moment. I know something about broken promises, he said at last. My people moved with the seasons once, traded, hunted, lived by the land's signs. Then fences came, laws written far from here. We were told where we could stand and where we could not. Layla turned toward him, surprised. He did not often speak of it. Few asked. I stayed, he continued. Not because I believed the words, but because leaving meant losing the graves of those I loved. This cabin sits on ground my father showed me when I was a boy. He said the land remembers even when people forget. The fire popped, sending sparks upward. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the door. They sat in shared quiet, the kind that did not demand filling, yet beneath it ran a current of unease. Layla knew she could not stay forever. The world did not allow such mercy without cost. Elias knew that by bringing her here, he had crossed an invisible line the men from the ranch would not forget. Nor would the town, when word reached it. The next morning dawned clear and bitter. Elias saddled his horse early, planning to ride toward the old west town for supplies. He hesitated, glancing back at the cabin. You'll be safe here for now, he said, but keep the door barred if anyone comes. Layla nodded, though fear stirred again. She watched him ride out, his figure shrinking against the white land. Alone once more, she felt the weight of what lay ahead. Shelter did not mean belonging. Rescue did not mean freedom. As the sun climbed, distant riders crossed the horizon, too far to see clearly, close enough to unsettle her. She pulled the blanket tighter and listened to the wind, wondering which forgotten trail would carry trouble back to the door first. The riders did not come straight to the cabin. They moved like men who knew the land but did not know Elias's habits, circling wide, cutting across the flats where wind kept the snow hard and loud beneath hooves. Lila watched from the small window, her breath fogging the glass. The figures blurred against the glare, but she could feel their purpose in the way they rode. They were searching, not traveling. She did not know if they belonged to her in-laws or to someone else, but in the West, a stranger on horseback could be either salvation or ruin. She kept the door barred and the curtain pulled, forcing herself to stay still. Stillness was a kind of strength out here. Panic wasted heat and judgment. When the riders finally passed beyond sight, she let the air out of her lungs slowly, as if she had been holding her breath since dawn. She had survived cruelty before. Yet what frightened her now was the thought that Elias would pay for her survival. The cabin held his life in every corner. A lariat coiled by the door, a rifle on pegs above the mantel, a small pouch of dried sage on a shelf, set near a worn book with pages softened by many hands. On the table lay a folded scrap of paper, rough and creased, weighed down by a stone. Elias's writing was careful and plain. Back before dark, keep the fire steady. If anyone comes, do not open. Layla traced the letters with her eyes. No one had ever written her instructions out of care before. It felt like stepping into sunlight after too many years in shade. It also felt dangerous, like something that could be taken away the moment she began to need it. She rose, moving carefully. Her wrists still ached, and her ankles were raw where the cold had bitten through thin stockings. She tore a strip from an old cloth and wrapped it around her skin the way she once saw a native healer do, tight but not cruel. The memory came sharp and unexpected. A small camp near a river, the smell of smoke and sweetgrass, an elder woman humming as she pressed warm stones into a man's palm. That woman had looked at Lila then with steady eyes and said, "The land does not ask you to be small. Only people do." Layla whispered those words now, letting them settle in her chest like a stubborn ember. Outside, the wind shifted. The quiet grew too heavy. By afternoon, the horizon darkened with low clouds. Snow began again, fine at first, then thicker, swallowing distance until the world became a narrow circle around the cabin. It was the kind of weather that turned short rides into lost ones. Lila stood near the window and searched for Elias. Nothing but white and shadow. The door did not open until evening, and when it did, cold rushed in, followed by Elias's silhouette, shoulders dusted with snow. He shut the door fast, barring it with a solid motion. Only then did he look at her. "You didn't open," he said, as if he had feared he might find the cabin empty. "No," she answered. "I saw riders." His jaw tightened. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. They didn't stop." Elias set down his saddlebag and pulled off his gloves slowly, thinking. "Town's full of talk," he said. "Word travels faster than horses when folks are hungry for it." Leela's throat tightened. "They'll come for me, maybe," he said. "Or maybe they'll come for trouble." He moved to the stove, lighting the lamp. Warm light filled the room, turning the cabin from a shelter into something almost gentle. Layla watched his hands. They were rough, scarred at the knuckles, but careful with small things. He poured coffee and set a cup near her without asking if she wanted it. The quiet of that gesture made her chest ache more than any harsh word ever had. "What happened in town?" she asked. Elias paused, then sat across from her. "A man named Rourke runs a store there," he said. "He also runs half the talk. He asked why my horse had 2 sets of prints leading back from your in-laws' place." Lila's shoulders tensed. "What did you say?" "I said I found a woman tied to a fence," Elias replied. "And I cut her loose." Her eyes dropped to the table. Shame and relief tangled together. They'll say I deserved it. Elias leaned forward slightly. They can say what they want, he murmured, but they don't get to decide what you deserve. The words struck something deep. Layla swallowed hard, afraid that if she spoke too much, her voice would shake. Elias continued, quieter now. Rourke asked if I aimed to marry you. Layla's breath caught. I told him I didn't know what I aimed to do, Elias said, but I knew I wasn't leaving you there. Silence spread between them, filled with things neither had the courage to name. A Wild West love story often began with a rescue, with bold words and a kiss beneath a lantern. But frontier life was not built for simple stories. It was built for hard choices and slow trust. Lila stared at the rim of her cup. If you keep me here, she said, you'll make enemies. Elias's gaze held hers. I already have enemies, he said softly. Most men who stand alone do. She wanted to ask about his loneliness, about what drove him to live this far from town and neighbors. She could see it in him, the way he carried quiet like a burden he pretended was a coat. But she was afraid that if she asked, she would be letting herself care. That night, the storm worsened. Wind pressed against the cabin walls, and snow tapped at the window like fingers. Elias offered her the bed and took the chair by the fire. Layla lay beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. She could not sleep. Every sound outside made her imagine riders dismounting, boots in the snow, the door forced open. After a long time, she spoke into the dark. Why did you really stop? Elias did not answer at once. The fire shifted, sending a low crack into the quiet. My mother died on a trail, he said finally. Not from violence, from being too tired, too cold, too unseen. People passed. They kept going. My father carried her for miles before he had to let her go. Lila's eyes stung. I'm sorry, Elias's voice roughened. I told myself I'd never be the one who kept going. The words hung in the dark, heavier than the storm. Lila turned her face toward the wall, pressing her fingers into the blanket to keep from reaching for him. In the days that followed, the cabin became both refuge and cage. Elias taught her small tasks, not because he wanted a servant, but because he wanted her to know she had a place. He showed her how to chop kindling without splitting her fingers, how to mend a seam so it held against wind. She helped with meals, learning the rhythm of his life. Sometimes they laughed, soft and surprised, over something small like a burned biscuit or a stubborn kettle. Those moments felt like stolen gold. Then reality returned, cold and sharp. A neighbor came one afternoon, a weathered man with wary eyes. He did not step inside, only stood at the doorway with his hat in his hands. Elias, he said, voice low. Folks are saying you took that widow. Layla's stomach turned at the word. Widow, as if that was all she could be. Elias stepped outside, shutting the door behind him so Lila could not hear everything. She pressed her ear to the wood anyway, catching pieces. Not your fight? The neighbor warned. Rourke's stirring trouble? Your name's being weighed in town. Elias replied, calm but firm. Let them weigh it. When he came back inside, snow clinging to his boots, his face was set in a way she had not seen before. Lila forced herself to speak. Tell me the truth, she said. What are they planning? Elias hesitated. They want me to bring you to town, he said. They say you belong with your husband's family until matters are settled. Lila's blood ran cold. Settled how? Elias's eyes darkened. However it benefits them. She sank into a chair, hands trembling. If I go back, they'll break me? Elias crouched beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but he did not touch her without permission. I won't let that happen, he said. Layla looked at him, seeing the truth in his face and the danger behind it. For the first time, she let herself imagine a life where she was not punished for breathing. She let herself imagine cowboy romance in the quiet way it might truly exist, not as a grand show, but as steady hands and shared fires. Then fear rose, because hope always invited loss. Outside, the wind eased for a moment, and in the sudden calm, the sound of distant hooves carried across the snow, faint but coming closer. The hooves came again, clearer this time, not a trick of wind or imagination. Layla rose so fast the chair scraped the floor. Elias was already moving, crossing to the window with a quiet urgency that tightened the air in the cabin. Two riders emerged from the white distance, then a third behind them. Their outlines sharpened as they neared, dark figures against the snow, horses blowing steam, heads low in the cold. They were not lost travelers. They rode straight, like men who knew exactly where they were going. Elias's hand slid to the rifle on the pegs, not lifting it yet, only touching it like a promise to himself. He looked back at Lila. "Stay behind me," he said. Her throat felt dry. "Is it them?" "It's trouble," he answered, and there was no comfort in the words. The riders stopped a short way from the cabin. One dismounted and walked forward, boots crunching in the snow. He did not shout. He did not need to. His confidence carried like a brand. Elias stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Layla could see him through the window now, his coat flapping slightly in the wind, his hat brim shading his eyes. He stood tall, shoulders square, the lone rancher facing the world alone. The man in front raised his chin. Even from inside, Lila could tell he was used to being obeyed. His coat was finer than most, his gloves clean, his horse well fed. He belonged to the town. He belonged to money and influence, the kind that twisted laws into chains. Rourke. Layla knew his name without having to hear it. She had seen him once before, years ago, when she first came through town with her husband. He had smiled at her then like a man judging a horse's teeth, polite on the surface, cold underneath. Rourke spoke, and though Layla could not catch every word through the thick door, she saw Elias's posture stiffen. Elias answered, short and firm. Rourke turned slightly, gesturing back toward the other riders. One of them held a rolled paper, likely a notice or claim made official by ink and a stamp. Lila's stomach knotted. The Old West had many weapons, and paper could cut deeper than a knife. Elias shook his head. Rourke's mouth tightened. His hand lifted, and one of the men stepped forward, trying to angle around Elias as if to approach the cabin door. Elias shifted once, placing himself in the man's path without touching him. The movement was calm, but it carried the warning of a storm cloud. Inside, Lila pressed her palms to the table to keep steady. Her mind raced. If they forced their way in, she would be dragged back. If Elias fought, he could be killed or taken. Either way, she would lose the only shelter she had known in years. The door opened suddenly, and Elias stepped back inside fast, barring it again. His face was drawn tight, as if he had swallowed something bitter. "They brought a paper," he said. Leila's voice came out small. "What does it say?" "It says your husband's kin claim you as their responsibility," Elias replied. "It says you are to be returned, or I'll be named as a thief." A cold wave went through her. "A thief," she whispered. "Like I am property." Elias's jaw clenched. "That's how they mean it." Leila's hands shook. She stared at the fire, at the dancing light, trying to hold on to what was real. Only days ago she had been tied to a fence like a discarded thing. Now she was sitting in a warm cabin with a blanket over her shoulders, listening to a man speak of law and theft as if her life could be counted and claimed. "Elias," she said, forcing the words out, "if you keep me here, they will ruin you." His eyes softened in a way that made her chest ache. "They might try," he said, "but you're not going back." A knock came at the door, hard enough to rattle the wood, then another. Rourke's voice carried through the cracks, calm and sharp. "Open up, we can do this proper." "No need for trouble." Elias did not answer. The knock came again, followed by the scrape of boots in snow as someone shifted position. Layla imagined them standing out there like wolves around a lantern. Elias turned to her. "There's a back way," he said. "Out the rear window, through the brush line. You can reach the creek bed and follow it east until you hit the ravine trail." Lila stared at him. "You want me to run?" "I want you alive," he replied. "If they take you, they'll break you. If I fight them here, they'll claim I started it. They'll bring more men. They'll burn this place down if they have to." Her breath caught. The thought of leaving him felt like being tied again, only this time by fear and attachment she had never expected to feel. "Come with me," she pleaded. Elias's gaze flickered with pain. "If I leave, they'll hunt us both," he said. "But if you go now, you might get clear. I can draw them off, buy you time." Layla shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I can't do it alone. You already have," he said quietly. "For too long." Another knock struck the door, louder. A man's voice rose behind Rourke's, rough with impatience. "We can take it down." Elias moved toward the rifle, then stopped. as if he knew that once he lifted it, the world would change. He looked back at Layla, and in his eyes she saw the weight of every forgotten trail he had ever ridden, every loss he had carried, every promise he had made to himself. I won't let them drag you, he said. But I also won't let you die for my pride. Layla's throat burned. She stood, stepping close enough that the warmth of him wrapped around her like the coat he had given her that first night. She wanted to touch his face, to hold on to him, to tell him she was not a burden, that she could be more than a rescued woman in a Wild West love story. But fear held her hand still. You're sending me away, she whispered, because you care. Elias's breath caught as if the word care had cut him open. He nodded once. I didn't aim for this, he said. I didn't aim the need to know you're safe. The door shook as someone shoved it. Snow dust fell from the beam above. Layla jumped, heart pounding. Elias stepped closer to her, voice low. Listen to me. Take the blanket. Take the small sack by the stove. There's dried meat, a flint, and matches. Follow the creek. Do not climb the ridge where you can be seen. Her tears spilled now, hot against cold cheeks. And you? Elias's eyes held hers with a quiet intensity that made the room feel smaller, closer, like the whole world had narrowed to this moment. I'll be right behind you, he lied softly, and they both knew it. The back window was small, its latch stiff with frost. Elias pried it open, and cold air poured in, carrying the scent of snow and distant horses. Lila climbed onto the bench beneath it, hands trembling, blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. She looked back once. Elias stood between her and the front door, rifle now in his hands, not raised but ready. The firelight painted his face in gold and shadow, and in that flickering light he looked like a man standing at the edge of something he could not step back from. I don't know if I'll ever see you again, Lila said, voice breaking. Elias swallowed hard. You will, he said, and his voice was rough as gravel. You have to... A loud crack sounded at the front, the bar straining under force. The door groaned like an old tree about to split. Lila climbed through the window, dropping into deep snow outside. Cold swallowed her boots. She stumbled, then caught herself, turning toward the dark brush line. Behind her, the cabin shook again, the wood crying out under pressure, and Elias's voice rose for the first time, sharp and commanding, aimed at the men outside. That's far enough. Layla froze, eyes wide, as the door finally splintered inward with a harsh sound, and the cabin's warm light spilled out into the storm like a beacon to every danger on the plains. The crack of the breaking door echoed across the snow, sharp as a gunshot. Lila forced her legs to move, plunging into the brush line as Elias had told her. Branches tore at her dress and the blanket, but she did not stop. Behind her, voices rose, rough and angry, tangled with Elias's steady commands. She did not look back. If she did, she knew she would turn around, and fear told her that choice would end everything. The creek bed lay just beyond the brush, a shallow cut in the land where ice glazed the stones. Lila slipped down into it, water seeping through her boots, biting like teeth. She followed the bend east, keeping low, using the land the way the old woman once taught her. The storm thickened again, snow closing ranks, hiding tracks and swallowing sound. She whispered thanks to the land for that mercy. Her breath came hard, chest burning, but she kept moving until her legs gave out beneath a stand of cottonwoods. There, she crouched and waited, tears freezing on her cheeks. Every sound made her flinch. Every shadow looked like a rider. She clutched the blanket and prayed not just for herself, but for the man standing alone against men who believed power was the same thing as right. Back at the cabin, Elias did not raise the rifle first. He stood his ground as Rourke stepped inside, snow blowing in around him. The other men crowded behind, eyes sharp with hunger for obedience. You're making this worse, Rourke said, glancing around the room as if measuring it for what it was worth. Stand aside. The woman belongs to her husband's people. Elias met his gaze. She belongs to herself, Rourke laughed once, short and humorless. That kind of talk gets men buried. Plenty of men are buried already, Elias replied. Most of them for less. Rourke's face hardened. He gestured, and one of the men moved toward the back window. Elias shifted instantly, blocking him. The rifle came up then, not aimed, but clear in its warning. No, Elias said. You won't touch her. The room felt smaller, tighter. Rourke studied Elias, his eyes calculating. Outside, the storm howled, sealing the cabin off from the world. Finally, Rourke lifted a hand. The men hesitated. You think you've won something? Rourke said quietly. But you're alone out here. You've always been alone. Elias's grip did not waver. Alone is better than cruel. Something passed through Rourke's eyes, then something like irritation mixed with doubt. He glanced at the rifle again, then at the door, as if weighing whether the cost was worth the prize. We'll talk again, Rourke said at last. This isn't finished. It is for today, Elias answered. Rourke stepped back, signaling the others. They retreated slowly, eyes never leaving Elias until the door shut behind them. The bar fell back into place with a solid thud. Only then did Elias lower the rifle. His legs trembled, the rush draining out of him all at once. He sank into the chair by the table and closed his eyes, breathing through the silence that followed. When the storm eased hours later, he went out into the night, following the creek bed east, calling Layla's name low and steady. He did not know if she would answer. He only knew he could not stop looking. She heard him before she saw him, that familiar calm in his voice cutting through fear. When she stepped out from the trees, wrapped in the blanket, he froze for a moment, as if afraid she might vanish. You're alive, he said, and the words broke in his throat. So are you, she answered, tears spilling freely now. He crossed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her like something precious and real. She buried her face against his chest, the steady beat of his heart grounding her in a way nothing else ever had. They did not go back to the cabin that night. Elias knew better. At first light, they rode east, following trails only he knew, paths that bent around trouble instead of meeting it head-on. Days passed. The land shifted from open plains to broken hills, from snow to patches of brown earth. They shared stories by small fires, learning each other slowly, carefully. Word traveled, as it always did. Rourke tried to press his claim in town, but the story did not sit well when told aloud. Tied fences and freezing women stirred memories folks preferred not to face. The notice lost its weight. The in-laws faded into silence, unwilling to draw more eyes their way. Elias and Lila settled near a river where the land softened and the wind spoke more gently. They built a small place together, board by board, hands learning each other's rhythms. It was not easy. Some nights fear still crept in. Some days the past knocked hard, but they faced it side by side. Layla found strength she had forgotten, she owned. Elias found a home that did not ask him to disappear. They did not rush their promises. They let them grow like roots, slow and sure. One evening, as the sun set low and gold over the water, Layla stood by the fence they had built together, resting her hand on smooth wood. Elias came up beside her, offering his coat against the cooling air. I used to think love was something you earned by enduring, she said softly. And now? He asked. Now, I think it's something you choose, she replied. Every day, Elias nodded, understanding more in that moment than words could hold. The land stretched quiet around them, no longer empty but full of meaning.